Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to explore how the most heavily analyzed book in human history contains some seriously weird, dark, and complex layers they definitely didn't teach you in youth group. We're looking way beyond those sanitized familiar stories and plunging straight into an ancient text that is literally far more culturally embedded and honestly bizarre than you might realize.
I mean, did they teach you this kind of stuff in Sunday school? Probably not. To unpack this, we're going to use the concept of an iceberg. We're completely bypassing the well-known surface stories and descending directly into the bizarre, ancient depths of these texts. If you think you already know everything there is to know about these ancient writings, well, prepare to have your perspective entirely shifted. The source material we're examining today uncovers concepts and narratives that genuinely make you wonder how they ever even made it into the final cut.
So, here's our map for the descent today. 1. Surprising historical contexts. 2. Cosmic monsters and angels. And 3. The dark and disturbing. Let's jump in.
All right, part 1. Surprising historical contexts.
Think about the disciples for a second. We usually picture these mature men with long, flowing beards following Jesus around, right? But based on the temple tax rules in Matthew 17, which, by the way, only applied to men over the age of 20, it's highly likely Peter was the only actual adult in the group. Jesus only pays the tax for himself and Peter. So this suggests Jesus entrusted his entire mission to a group of teenagers. Suddenly, all their constant bickering about who's the greatest and their frequent, kind of clueless misunderstandings, it makes a whole lot more sense when you realize you're dealing with literal adolescents.
Now consider the infamous Tower of Babel. It wasn't just some tall building, it was a massive ziggurat. Ancient Mesopotamians built these stepped pyramids not as, early skyscrapers, but as artificial mountains representing a cosmic connection between earth and heaven. When the builders of Babel tried to make a name for themselves, they were attempting to use sacred architecture to exalt themselves and basically force a meeting with the divine. And that is exactly why the text portrays a swift intervention to scatter them.
And this is wild. It brilliantly illustrates how the biblical writers shared the ancient flat earth cosmology of their time. I mean, they didn't have telescopes. They observed a world that looked like a flat disk covered by a solid dome, often called the firmament, which literally held back the waters of heaven. That's exactly why the text talks about opening the floodgates of heaven. The source material points out that the goal here wasn't to write a modern science textbook. It was to communicate profound theological truths using the conceptual framework that ancient people actually understood. Recognizing this fundamentally changes how we should read the text today.
Moving down the iceberg. Part 2. Cosmic monsters and angels.
You have to completely forget these sanitized pop culture angels. Biblical angels are depicted as such overwhelming, terrifying, alien-like beings that humans instantly fall on their faces in absolute horror at the sight of them. Our modern image of cute, chubby babies with little wings could not be further from the source texts. Instead, we are dealing with entities like cherubim with 4 different faces and wheels covered in eyes, or seraphim burning with fire and 6 wings. There's a very good reason the first words out of an angel's mouth in these texts are almost always, "Do not be afraid."
And things get even stranger in Genesis 6 with the Nephilim. The source details this fascinating view where rebellious divine beings, referred to as the sons of God, cross forbidden boundaries to take human wives. The resulting offspring are the Nephilim, often translated as giants or fallen ones. This wasn't just everyday human sin, It was a severe, supernatural corruption of the human bloodline that prompted an absolute planetary reset.
Ancient authors also viewed the world as filled with actual chaos monsters, and they used these creatures to demonstrate God's ultimate power to subdue the untamable. You read about creatures like the Leviathan, this armored, fire-breathing sea monster, or the massive behemoth. In ancient Near Eastern literature, these sea and land monsters perfectly symbolize the terrifying, chaotic forces of nature. When the text describes these beasts, it's making a really profound statement. Even the most terrifying, mythical forces of chaos are ultimately kept on a short leash by the Creator.
Which brings us to a massive, overarching theme, the divine council. To the ancient Israelites, spiritual warfare wasn't just about personal temptation. It was a cosmic battle against rebellious members of this divine council, who demanded worship from the nations. The texts describe a worldview where lesser divine beings, or Elohim, were delegated to oversee different nations. When they became corrupt and demanded worship for themselves, they became the adversarial forces that the New Testament later refers to as principalities and powers. It is an epic, cosmic framework going on entirely behind the scenes of human history.
Finally, we hit the absolute bottom. Part 3. The dark and disturbing. Take the prophet Elisha, for example. where a group of 42 young men maliciously mock his prophetic authority and are subsequently mauled by 2 bears in a brutal act of divine judgment. On the surface, it sounds like an extreme overreaction to some kids calling a guy bald, right? But context is everything. The source material explains that these were likely young men representing a community steeped in idol worship, actively rejecting God's prophet. The horrifying arrival of the bears wasn't random. It was a severe prophetic act of judgment, meant to show Israel exactly what was at stake when they entirely rejected divine authority.
Or consider Judges 19. It's the horrifying account of a Levite sacrificing his concubine to a violent mob. In this story, a man saves himself by throwing his concubine out to be brutally abused by a mob overnight, ultimately resulting in her death. It's graphic, it's sickening, and it leaves readers completely stunned. It naturally begs the question, why include such absolute depravity in the text?
Well, the text includes these nightmare scenarios to impartially highlight the absolute depths of human corruption. It demonstrates the catastrophic consequences of a society operating without order or guidance. The constant refrain throughout the book of Judges is this chilling warning: in those days Israel had no king, everyone did as they saw fit. The writers weren't hiding the ugliness of humanity, they were putting it on full display. They wanted to horrify the reader to prove an overarching point. This is the dark, chaotic reality of what happens when a society completely abandons its moral compass.
So, stepping back, it becomes clear that this library of texts is infinitely more complex and culturally embedded than a simple, sanitized rulebook. We've gone from teenage disciples and ancient ziggurats, all the way down to cosmic chaos monsters, divine councils, and unflinchingly dark accounts of human depravity. It's a vast, ancient collection that absolutely forces us to step out of our modern comfort zones to truly grasp what the original authors were saying.
You know, you could literally spend a lifetime studying this. Which leaves us wondering, what other profound hidden truths are waiting just below the surface for those brave enough to look deeper? I hope this explainer has shattered a few assumptions today and sparked your curiosity to look at these ancient texts with completely fresh eyes. Until next time, keep exploring the depths,